Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show.
I realized that if I let go, it's just going to pull me under and I'm not going to have a chance to get back up.
Absolutely essential. I mean, I will paddle without a leash, but I don't really like it.
I guess it would be like a catch-22. So there's so many pros to having a leash, and I'm sure like the cons of a leash, there's less, but they're probably more deadly.
Stand-up paddleboarding offers a simple and easy way to enjoy time on the water. The boards are lightweight and easy to transport, and the paddling style is fairly intuitive and easy to learn. Many, maybe even a majority of the recreational style boards come equipped with an ankle leash, keeping you tethered to the board when you fall off. This seems like a great safety feature, as you certainly want to maintain contact with this very buoyant craft. But this is deceiving. This type of leash is great for ocean and lake water, but it can be a fatal hazard in the moving water environment. A long-standing tenet of whitewater safety has been to avoid connecting yourself to any kind of loose webbing or ropes that can snag on something in the water, creating a potentially life-threatening entanglement hazard. To illustrate this problem, we'll hear an accident story from our guest Dave Card. He's a casual recreational paddleboarder and was unaware of the danger posed by his leash system. And how would he have known? It's not mentioned anywhere on his equipment, and it wasn't mentioned from the supboard retailer where he bought his board. And he's not really into the whitewater thing at all. He was just looking for a fun and relaxing day on a mostly gentle and placid stream that just happened to have a tree strainer in the one rough spot on that stretch of river. Dedicated whitewater paddleboarders are working to solve this entanglement problem. Leash systems have evolved that connect above the waist so they can be reached easily, with quick release mechanisms and even automatic fail points to disconnect in the event of an entanglement. We're going to hear from some of these whitewater sup paddlers today. These are the paddlers that are taking calculated risks, taking on more and more difficult whitewater, and pushing the limits of the sport. I wanted to find out from them how to mitigate the risk of leash use in whitewater. To be clear, that risk is never zero. There are some that advocate for no leash use at all. Recently, a major paddle sports organization in Great Britain banned leash use in all of its sanctioned events and instructional courses. This ban was in large part due to a study they commissioned which revealed high failure rates among some quick-release systems. The study claimed that 42% failed to release under tension. The exact methods of the study and the exact leash systems involved were not included in any of the materials I could find about it online. Hopefully they'll release more information about it soon so that we can make better decisions. This lack of transparency makes it hard to interpret and apply the results, and the leash ban in general was not a very popular decision among many in the sup community. I can understand their frustration. Just like everything else in whitewater, risk calculation has to be made by the individual paddler after a clear consideration of the factors involved. As I've said before, this high-stakes game is part of the beauty and thrill of our sport. This episode is a little different from our usual content, and I think the audience that would most benefit from hearing it is the casual sup paddler that may be unaware of the leash hazard. So if you know of anyone like this, please share the episode with them. Here's Dave's story.
So my name is Dave Card. I'm a retired teacher, but still working as a chemical engineer in the community. I live in Philomath, Oregon, real close to Corvallis, and real close to the Willamette River, where the incident occurred. And so I think this is probably my third or fourth time being on a paddleboard. And all previous times I was on the lake. So this is my first experience on a river. It was low water. There was a few sections where we actually had to, we were hitting the skeg was actually hitting the bottom. So it was not too deep. Beautiful day, just no wind, sunny day, probably in the mid 80s or low 80s. It was just gorgeous. That section of the Willamette River is very calm. So we had already been on the river for probably close to an hour and just calmly floating along. We didn't do much paddling or anything. The current was just taking us downstream. So I think, in essence, that serenity, that calmness really led to being a little overconfident with the situation, especially looking back on it now. That was the tricky part about this, is that literally the area where the incident happened were the only rapids probably for several miles. At the time of the incident, we were both on the same board. We had our supplies on the other board. So my girlfriend was tethered to the board that we had supplies on and our phone and things like that, which turned out to be very lucky in this case. And then I was tethered to the board that we were on.
David and his girlfriend were both wearing Velcro ankle leashes. These are the most common and least expensive type of leash system, often sold as standard equipment with paddleboards intended for lake and ocean use. When used in those environments where entrapment is much less of an issue, it's the appropriate and safe tool for the job. So let's hear why these are unsafe in moving water.
With the river current pushing you, it's really basically impossible to reach down to your ankle. It just is too far away. The current is too strong. You can't go back upstream.
This is Evan Stafford, Communications Director for American Whitewater and co-director of the AW Safety Program. Evan is a longtime kayaker, oarsman, stand-up paddleboarder, and swiftwater rescue instructor from Colorado. The staff at American Whitewater had seen the trend of leash-associated fatalities in their accident database, and it's been on their radar screen to try to address the problem.
In the ocean, ankle leash has always been the standard for any kind of surfing, really, and stand-up paddleboarding kind of followed suit in the ocean. When it started getting transferred to the river, I think it became pretty obvious that like an ankle leash with no way to release was going to be a problem. And pretty quickly, I think a quick release system started to get implemented, but not with a lot of experiential evidence. I think it was just kind of, this seems like a at least better way to wear a leash in the river. And I don't think there was a ton of discussion around is and where is a leash necessary, what types of rivers, what types of whitewater, what types of flows, that kind of thing. As more time has passed and as there's been many more users, and there's been a pretty serious growth in like river surfing and waves being built specifically for river surfing in whitewater parks. There's been more attention on leashes and leash incidents, and also kind of going into the accident database that American Whitewater keeps. There is an obvious trend of most incidents involving paddleboards and river surfboards involving the leash as the main hazard.
Of the 16 paddleboard-related deaths in the U.S. reported to the database in the past 6 years, 10 were related to leash entanglement. The leash is only part of the problem, though. In a lot of these incidents, inexperience in whitewater and even lack of PFD use also seems to be a significant factor.
I think the biggest gap in the leash situation is education, and it always has been for all whitewater incidents and accidents. It's often a case of not knowing rather than intentionally finding yourself in a hazardous situation. That's the biggest element of our safety program is our education outreach. And there's so many just opportunities to get especially like a recreational paddleboard and end up at the river without the knowledge of how dangerous rivers can be. having, knowledge of the river, having a knowledge of what different classifications of difficulty mean, what different water levels mean for different water environments, the characteristics that, each certain river kind of has, the other known hazards on the river and where they are. It's kind of a main element of our safety guidance is a know before you go. And it really applies to paddleboarding and river surfers.
Let's get back to Dave and his girlfriend as they float peacefully towards a bend in the river.
So it's kind of curving off to the left, and off to the right on that bank were rapids. And we're not doing a whole lot of paddling. We're just letting the current kind of take us. We were so relaxed that, I think we were both like almost laying on the boards, hitting that area. All of a sudden, it just pulled us very rapidly into some trees. There's 3 different areas of trees actually that had fallen and were sticking out, jutting out into the water. So it pulled us into the first tree, and shockingly, we didn't realize any kind of danger. She kind of got up and started trying to push us away, and it was at that point you could feel the current. The current had completely changed, and when she tried to push away from the tree branch, the paddleboard tipped, and I fell out the back. She kind of just realized immediately that it would be better for her to be on the other paddleboard in case I needed to get back up on the one I just fell off of. So she jumped to the other paddleboard, which was kind of an amazing thing. She ended up clearing all the trees, which was also fantastic. But once I hit the water, I was pulled under the tree. So the currents were really strong, just shockingly strong when I hit it. And I even for that split second, I didn't really realize the danger I was in. I wasn't really thinking. It was just like, oh, okay, I'm in the water. I'll get back up. So when I came back up, there were 2 more trees that I had to get past that were in the water. When I pulled back up, I could actually use my tether, and I pulled up to my paddleboard. And I got partially up to it, and I realized that I was going to hit the next tree. So I started kicking as hard as I could, trying to swim over, get past it, and I almost made it. And I remember hitting the second tree, and it was almost like an explosion. I was thrown off the paddleboard back under the water. So it pulled me back under, and then I kind of panicked. Because I could feel that the currents were much stronger than I had anticipated, and so I actually had to fight to get back to the surface. But I fought to the surface before I got to the third tree, and luckily, the thought occurred to me was like, "What is happening to my girlfriend? Is she okay?" So I thought instead of swimming under the third tree, I would grab on to the trunk of it, which is lucky I did. So what happened was I grabbed onto that trunk, and it was pulling me, and I was able to look back, and she was on the other paddleboard, and luckily she sailed around the trees. So now she's going past the rapids area, and she's able to make it to the shore. And in that period, I was able to kind of assess my situation. So I didn't let go of the trunk yet, and I looked over. And now I'm really realizing I'm attached to the strap, and that is attached to my paddleboard, which is now a good 12 feet away from me. And that strap is now wrapped around a branch, and it's not coming off. And now I'm gripping on, and the current is trying to pull me out under the tree. And I realized that if I let go, it's just going to pull me under, and I'm not going to have a chance to get back up. And I'm attached to now my paddleboard, which is completely lodged around a pretty good sized branch. Branch not going to break. I was holding onto the log with both arms, and I could momentarily take an arm off and try to reach down and get to that ankle strap, and I could not pull it off. And I couldn't try for too long because I was holding on with one arm at that point, and it was much harder to hold on to the log. Immediately, I tried to keep myself calm because now I realize it's life and death, and I felt like if I'm going to survive this, I just got to keep as much energy as I can and try to hold on.
While Dave hung on for his life, his girlfriend was able to get to the riverbank, hike back up near his position on the tree, and call 911 for help. Luckily for him, this is a very popular river, and the county sheriff had a motorized boat patrol out that day. They were able to respond and reach his location just 10 to 15 minutes after his ordeal started. But due to the position of the trees and the nature of the current, they couldn't really directly free him from the entanglement right away.
My girlfriend knew I was trapped because I said, I had told her when she was first walking up that if I let go, I'm going to drown. That's basically what I knew. It got pretty dicey because there was a point where she had called. They were coming. They're on their way. She was staying on with the 911 operator, and that she was, and they could actually track the boat through GPS and how close it was getting to us. It was getting to that point where it was like, I don't know how much longer I could hold on. And so that was kind of terrifying just to think about that, letting go. So it was a really weird psychological roller coaster to go through that. So they came up and it was just too dangerous for them to get to the paddleboard. So they couldn't get to the strap. So what ended up happening is they handed me a knife and I could reach down just enough and I severed the cable. And once that was done, once I cut that line, it was trivial. I could get, I just swam under the log basically, or swam over the log. I could just swim to the shore pretty easily at that point. I was exhausted, but once I got past that tree, the waters were calm enough and easy to navigate. Everything was cool. The only thing was that, I was naked at that point because my shorts and everything were pretty much gone from the current. But that was fine.
It seems pretty evident that ankle leash use on moving water should be avoided. But every SUP paddler I spoke with in preparation for this episode made it very clear that attachment to the board with some type of leash system is much more convenient, facilitates the learning process, and saves lives in many scenarios. Here's Leela Winton. She's a good friend and a hard-charging paddleboarder.
My name is Leela Winton. I am a water woman from Western North Carolina, and I do whitewater stand-up paddleboarding. I'm also a raft guide. I am a team rider for Hala stand-up paddleboards. I enjoy technical whitewater on my paddleboard. I also really love river surfing and on stationary waves. I work full-time in the summer as a raft guide on a class 3-4 river on the Tennessee-North Carolina border called the Nolichucky. And I teach stand-up paddleboarding. I do coaching and lessons. Most of my experience is Southeast whitewater, and most of that is pretty creaky and lots of strainer and tree activity and undercuts and stuff. And I think I would still rather be able to pull my board back to me after wiping out than worry about the leash. The number of instances is so much drastically skewed toward equipment recovery benefit than from fear of entrapment for me. One long swim without your board and you realize the difference that a leash would make safety-wise. But I just keep going back to thinking about spray skirts. Like, spray skirts keep water out of your boat. So when you flip over, it doesn't fill with water. It's such a similar thing. It's like you wouldn't do it without it. Yes, it could be dangerous if it doesn't come off. But yeah, I definitely will always use a leash, and I never would use an ankle leash. And I river surf a lot, and I see lots of ankle leashes. And it's not even worth approaching the subject of an ankle leash with somebody who's not wearing a PFD or helmet either.
Chris Morgan offered his opinion as well. Chris is one of the SUP paddlers that's really pushing the limits of SUP navigability, frequently paddling the Upper Gauley and other difficult rivers.
My name is Chris Morgan. I learned how to stand up paddleboard in New Hampshire and Maine. I spent some time down south, so I paddled a whole bunch of southeast rivers from like the Chattahoochee down in Atlanta up to like the Gauley in West Virginia, and then also out west, a bunch of rivers in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and obviously up here in New England. I guess it would be like a catch-22. So there's so many pros to having a leash, and I'm sure like the cons of a leash, there's less, but they're probably more deadly. The problem with SUP is it's difficult. So, I mean, difficult to learn for a lot of people. So if you're trying to learn and half of your time is spent trying to get your board, you're not going to learn. I think a lot of kayakers can probably relate to surfing in the ocean more so than paddleboarding whitewater. And it would be the same thing as not wearing a leash in the ocean and then having to swim after your board back to the shore over and over and over again after you fall. If you're getting rid of leashes for beginners, you're putting a solid, hard stop to any sort of growth of that sport. So that's, I think, one thing, just being close to your board and being able to pull it back. Second thing is foot entrapments. Because if you're still attached to your board, you can pull that board back to you and use that as almost like a platform to pull yourself back up to. Or that foot entrapment wouldn't happen at all just because you're back on your board. A third thing would be rescues. I've talked to a handful of people. I've witnessed a few kind of funky entrapments or snags. I think a lot of them can be avoided with just proper planning, which goes back to just knowing whitewater. I mean, I think it's the same thing as saying a kayaker is going to paton somewhere. It's like, don't get yourself in those situations and you won't have to deal with the outcome of it.
So what kind of leash system do Leela and Chris and other whitewater paddleboarders use? One of the best sources of information about this is Paul Clark, or Sup Paul as he is known in the paddleboarding world. He has some great videos on his website that demonstrate these systems if you're curious to see them. I've linked one of these on the Safety Break Facebook site.
I'm Paul Clark. Sup, Paul. That's how I introduce myself in my videos and my own podcast. I've been a river paddleboarder for about 10 years. I've paddled over 160 rivers around the world. I always swear by a quick release leash system worn above the waist with a minimum of 2 release points. So I use, for the most part, a waist belt with a large strap in the front that's unique to anything that I'm wearing, so I know exactly where that is. And on the back, attached to a metal D-ring, is a sailor shackle. It's an industrial shackle that comes with the hollow leash system that I work. Badfish, NRS, there are a few brands out there that have a very similar sailor shackle. But having a 2-piece system is critical, so if one fails, you're going to have another system that's different, and so it will fail differently. And so it's either the belt system for me or associated with a quick release belt on a rescue vest.
Leela describes how this release process works.
So first pull place that I would pull is at my belt. That's the first place that I would pull is my belt because it's closest. It's right by my hand. The second place, then you're kind of reaching behind you and finding the leash, and that's a little bit more complicated. You know, you like the one on your leash has to be that straight direction pull to have it work right. Also, like, you know, it can't be like full of grit and mud, you know, like needs to be well taken care of. Also, if you are using like a kayak rescue belt with the metal thing, then up through the nylon buckle, like, don't use that metal part. Your goal is for it to release quickly. You want it to be as quickly out of there as possible.
There's a potential that the safest kind of leash might be something that just breaks under a certain amount of low pressure so that it's not just going to fall off, but you don't even have to release it. If you get entrapped, it just breaks. And maybe, you know, it's not like actually breaks. Potentially, it just has its own release point under pressure that doesn't have anything to do with you having to release it.
The godfather of river paddleboarding, Dan Gavir, he was really focused on a break point, a natural break point. So he double layers Velcro so that no matter what, given a certain amount of tension, the board frees yourself. I don't have that school of thought. I want to be attached to my board. I want to be able to have a deliberate release with it. So I attach my quick release system with a locking carabiner or small locking carabiner directly to the D-ring of the board so that it's very clear how to free it if someone else needs to free it, but it's not going to free itself necessarily unless the leash itself breaks.
So there's been a lot of innovation in terms of better leash designs, and these are a work in progress. Unfortunately, this comes with some cost to the user, though.
The leash itself is like $60, $70 for a proper quick release leash. And it's not recommended that you put it on a non-rescue PFD. But a lot of times I see people with like just a regular PFD and they clip the high quality, leash that they bought just onto their side straps. So they've lost one of the important redundancies because they're just clipping it onto their side. But yeah, just those PFDs, like most people don't have, they may be a whitewater person and then they're like, well, I got to get a leash and a new PFD that has this on it. So that's a barrier. So then they're like, well, I'll do sort of the right thing. I'll get this quick release leash, but then I'm just going to put it on my freestyle kayaking PFD because that's what I got. And then so, I mean, I don't think that it would be that big of a deal for the manufacturers to start making a few more PFDs that are sub-specific.
One thing that everybody seems to agree on is that no matter which type of leash system you have, it's critically important that you practice releasing it.
Like, I can't really stress enough that the key to wearing a leash is knowing how to release it and knowing that you can if it becomes entrapped.
I've had to pull my leash once in my life, and it was associated with a rescue vest, so I knew exactly where the release was. I have a shackle on the back, a release shackle on the back, so I always wear a 2-leash system. And still, I was underwater, hitting everywhere on my body, my helmet, where is that leash? And it just stays in one place. It's not dangling. So that was really the heads up moment that more than just having a quick release leash system worn above the waist, you have to actually know how to use it through experience, either a variety of drills using gravity on dry land or really controlled environments in swift water.
All this conversation just reminds me to practice with my equipment, and I do. I test it, like when I'm putting it on for the first time of the day, I just make sure that it's working and I'll put it back in. Just muscle memory, like where is it today? Like, do I have this flexibility to reach behind me?
So it seems that a few ideas here are pretty well established and generally agreed upon. Ankle leash use in whitewater should be avoided. If a leash is worn, it should be worn above the waist and have a quick release system with redundancy, and the user should be well practiced in its use. But there's been a lot of discussion recently about another idea, maybe avoiding leash use altogether, at least in some specific scenarios. Here's some thoughts about this from Chris Morgan and Evan Stafford again.
I mean, I think it's still very personal preference. Like some days, like if I do a class 1-2 river, like I might not use a leash that day. If you're on one of those like park and play spots or a whitewater center, if you're in a space that's controlled, you probably don't need a leash. Like get used to swimming a little bit. And honestly, surfing is a hell of a lot more fun without a leash, just because you can move around more. You're not stepping on it. You don't have this thing tugging on you.
There's a lot of situations where just wearing a leash is not going to be worth the hazard. And I'd almost venture to say most. Anywhere where you don't feel like your board is going to be essential to rescue, or that you don't feel like you're just going to lose it downstream. I would probably disagree with the idea that it's always a hazard to have a leash. I think that much like in the ocean, your board can be a very useful rescue tool. That's your flotation. That's going to keep you out of the water. That can get you to shore more quickly or out of a dangerous situation. So having your board close to you can be quite a nice thing to have as an available option, and a leash is the best way to do that. So I think what we're really starting to see in the river environment is that there's times where having a leash system is going to be perhaps a nice safety tool, and worth the potential hazard. And then in other environments, it's definitely potentially not going to be there. There's not a kind of real easy to define line of you should have a leash here and not there. There's a bit of personal choice involved there. It's kind of a freeing idea, I think, that maybe you don't have to wear a leash. Sometimes it's more fun without a leash, and it is just kind of a freer feeling.
Well, as Evan says, there's really not a clear consensus about this. There's just too many variables to make a blanket recommendation for or against leash use overall, and it really comes down to the judgment of the individual user. I think Paul sums it all up pretty well here.
Well, I think I really want to emphasize the fact that there's a variety of perspectives for wearing leashes on a paddleboard. Leashes can entangle you and kill you. Unless you know how to use a leash, don't use a leash and paddle with competent people who could assist you in your growth and also in your rescue. Leashes have known to kill people. Those could be avoided with the proper equipment and the proper training and the proper familiarization of how the equipment works. I choose to wear a leash when I'm running whitewater. It's a quick release system worn above the waist with a minimum of 2 release points. I connect the leash to my board with a locking carabiner. I know my system, and I encourage people to know their system as well. At the same time, I respect what the Czechs are doing with a complete no leash system. It's not my way, but they're doing it. And I respect the people who use a variety of ways to free themselves, including just a variety of Velcro or buckle systems.
One of the final points I think is important is the role of SUP board and leash manufacturers and retailers in the education process of paddlers. And primarily I'm talking about those that are selling ankle leashes to recreational users. A quick internet search reveals that the majority of the SUP manufacturers and national chain retailers that sell ankle leashes don't have much, if any, mention of the appropriate usage or the dangers of these listed in their sales descriptions. Only the few whitewater-specific companies such as Holla, Sol, or Badfish make this distinction. These companies are proactively addressing the issue, making educational content about it, attaching warning labels to their boards and leash systems, and innovating the leash designs to make them safer. It seems to me that those that are involved in ankle leash production and sales have some ethical responsibility to improve their messaging on this as well.
One of the things we're working on is we're revamping our safety code. And as part of it, we're trying to create category of hang tags that end up on those kind of products. But that is actually the goal, is to try to kind of get that safety information into the hands of all river users, not just the ones who have kind of looked at it and already decided they're committed to whitewater experience. You know, we also just have some pretty basic education campaigns. We do have some leash instructional videos. And like you said, like Holla has some of that stuff. Sol, some other paddleboard companies. Badfish has some information, you know, like a lot of the kind of major whitewater board companies are really starting to kind of try to create a culture of safety and have that educational information out there.
Thanks to Dave Card for sharing his story today. Like many of us that have experienced firsthand some of the harsh realities of the river environment, he learned a couple of lessons from his experience.
I think the 2 big takeaways were obviously the strap's a really bad idea on a river. What I realized later, was kind of horrifying, is that while I was underwater, that strap could have caught Andy Branch underwater and held me under. And then, of course, the other thing is that I just totally underestimated the danger that surrounds objects that are in the water. right? And how that current changes. It made sense to me later that the water would rush under the trees themselves. But the force of that and the swiftness of that current and the ability of it to pull underneath was shocking. That really surprised me.
Thanks also to the multiple guests that contributed to this episode. I had much longer conversations with each of them that I couldn't really include here due to time constraints and the flow of the story. But they all helped to inform our knowledge of the topic and really made this episode happen. So thanks to Leela, Chris, Paul, and Evan. Can't wait to share some time with each of you on the river soon. If you want more information about this topic overall, check out Paul's website, suppaul.com. Hope to see you next time on the Safety Break. Here's Evan with the last word.
I guess I would just reiterate that for everyone interested in leash use to understand what you're getting into with the leash before going on the river. I think that's the key. And my main goal, I think organizationally as American Whitewater, our main goal is to provide people with the necessary information to make decisions on their own about how to be safe in the river environment. It takes time to understand, what's hazardous when there's kind of a new approach to having fun on the river. And in the end, that's what it's all about. It's like, how do we make it fun? Like, it's all about having a good time and enjoying the river. And if you can be safe, then that makes it a lot more fun.
Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.